In the cold dark of the void, there are names that echo through time like curses: Cadia, Istvan, Kalth. But some names are not spoken. Some are scrubbed from cogitator memory, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and fear. Andoc Prime is one such name, not because it burned in glory, not because it shattered under Xeno's assault or rebelled in fire and heresy, but because it turned inward. It devoured itself. Few records remain, and those that do are fragmented, corrupted by data rot or sealed behind the kind of clearance that drives men mad with the weight of forbidden knowledge. Yet, through whispered tales in the lower hive habs, through corrupted Vox recordings intercepted by rogue traders, the story emerges. Andoc Prime was a world that began with promise, but ended in something far more sinister. It was not lost to war. It was not taken by demons or aliens. It was swallowed whole by the very soil beneath its people's feet. It became hunger. Living, dreaming hunger. Now, when its name is muttered at all, it is in the trembling hush of those who speak of cursed systems and forbidden worlds. For what happened on Andoc Prime was not simply a planetary tragedy. It was a warning, one the Imperium refused to heed, and one that may yet echo across the stars. Andoc Prime was not always a whisper in the void. In the earliest years of the Great Crusade, it was a beacon of untapped potential, one of the many planets marked for integration into the burgeoning Imperium of man. Discovered by the exploratory fleets of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Andoc Prime seemed almost too perfect. A stable climate, rich soil, mineral abundance beneath its mountains, and no hostile Xenos presence. It was a world waiting to be tamed, a jewel ready to be mounted into the Emperor's crown. The first colonists were handpicked, the best among agri workers, geoengineers, and terraformation adepts. The official records from those early days speak with reverent optimism. Andoc Prime was to be a breadbasket world, a resource hub that would feed millions across nearby sectors. The initial terraforming efforts were surprisingly easy. The world's biosphere accepted human presence with minimal resistance. Crops took root with unnatural speed. Animals bred at accelerated rates. Lakes brimmed with fish never catalogued before, and flora bloomed in colors unknown to any other world. The Mechanicus noted it with awe, speaking of a possible genetic resonance in the soil, as though the very planet anticipated and welcomed the touch of mankind. But there were anomalies, even then. Subtle inconsistencies in gravity, echoes heard deep within caves, and a persistent, low-frequency hum that instruments picked up but humans couldn't consciously hear. These were brushed aside in the name of progress. Colonial records from this era show a brief golden age. Cities were constructed swiftly, organic, curved architecture that mimicked the native landscape. The people of Andoc Prime felt at peace, even euphoric. Some compared the world to a paradise, a new Eden in the stars. But behind the public triumphs were private notes from administratum scribes and mechanicus magi, hinting at growing unease. There were stories of dreams shared across thousands, all depicting a vast mouth beneath the ground. There were shepherds who returned from the woods changed, calm yet distant, their speech laced with new, unknown idioms. Priests of the Ministorum filed confused reports of heretical symbols appearing naturally in rock formations and tree bark, only to vanish days later. These signs should have prompted caution. But to the Imperium, a productive world was a precious thing, especially one without rebellion or warfare. Resources flowed outward, reports remained optimistic, and governors were rewarded for their efficiency. Dissent was classified as sedition. Scribes who expressed discomfort were reassigned. Clerics who questioned the world's nature found themselves denounced for doctrinal deviation. Andoc Prime became a symbol not of divine mystery, but of bureaucratic perfection. It was added to trade routes, used as a model for colonization lectures, and praised in sermons as a gift from the emperor. Yet, even within this facade, the seeds of horror were germinating. The forests grew thicker each year, pressing against human settlements. Vines twisted around buildings at unnatural speeds, sometimes overnight. The local wildlife began to change subtly. Bone structures warped, teeth became needle-like, eyes turned eerily human. Colonial children played in the woods and returned speaking of friends inside the ground. These stories were ignored or punished, rationalized as dreams or pranks. But beneath the surface, the planet was changing. Or perhaps it was always like this. waiting, adjusting, shaping itself around the intruding species like a predator learning its prey. A scholar named Ieltha Vor, now purged from all official archives, once wrote in a private journal that Andoc Prime was less a world, more a wound that learned how to smile. Her writings were dismissed as madness, yet they capture the growing sense of something deeply wrong. The soil itself seemed alive, the way it responded to pressure and footsteps. Trees leaned toward humans as they passed. Some settlers claimed to see faces in the clouds, faces that mirrored their own. Still, construction continued. Churches were built, manufactorums buzzed, and the tides rolled in. By the end of the first century of colonization, Andoc Prime was no longer just compliant, it was devout. The populace spoke of the world with spiritual reverence, not just as a place, but as a presence. Songs emerged in the local dialects praising the feaster below, the mouth that hungers, or Mother Andoc. No clear cult had yet formed, but the cultural vocabulary was shifting. The people were beginning to love their planet in a way that was no longer metaphorical. They were beginning to worship it. And so Andoc Prime moved past its promising beginnings into something far darker. It was no longer just a place humans lived on. It was becoming a partner in a silent, monstrous pact, and the planet, ever silent, ever still, continued to smile. By the 3rd century of habitation, the reports ceased entirely. Andoc Prime was not declared lost, nor did it receive any formal inquisitorial attention. It simply went quiet, a bureaucratic silence, deafening in its implications. Vox transmissions were attempted and failed. Astropathic contacts fell into madness when trying to reach minds on the planet. Officially, the administratum marked it as communication disrupted, cause unknown. But within the shadowed halls of the Officio Munitorum and the Inquisition, a darker truth was suspected. The planet had turned inward and sealed itself away. What makes this phase of Andoc Prime's history so chilling is not just the silence, but the indifference it inspired. With resources still arriving intermittently via automated systems and servitor-guided transport, there was little reason to investigate. The Mechanicus continued to extract mineral tithes through pre-programmed dig sites. The ecclesiarchy redirected their missionaries to more fertile grounds. Overcrowded Imperial data streams let the planet's name slip into the void. In a galaxy of constant screams, Andoc Prime's quiet was comforting. Until one looked closely. Archival fragments suggest that long-range auger scans began detecting unnatural phenomena. Thermal patterns across the planetary surface changed in ways that mimicked respiration. Vast, lung-like expansions and contractions over continental masses. Magnetic fields twisted into repeating sigils. Orbital pict captures revealed cities that no longer conformed to their original layouts. Streets curled into spirals. Buildings formed geometric patterns that mirrored neural pathways. It was as if the settlements themselves had begun to mutate, reshaping to serve some greater, hidden design. The most haunting detail lies in the final messages that leaked out. These weren't formal communications, but desperate scraps, broken Vox signals, and astropathic nightmares. A mining overseer wept blood as he described the stone eating his workers. A preacher screamed of listening roots that pulsed with breath. A child's voice, distorted by static, asked, "Do you love Mother yet?" Each message terminated abruptly, usually with unintelligible shrieks or long stretches of silence. Then nothing. No further transmissions. Just the hum of the void. A rogue trader named Heron Vask claimed to have landed on Andoc Prime decades after this silence began. His logbook, smuggled into a forbidden archive, details a world of impossible beauty and horror. He wrote of grass that cut like razors, statues with shifting expressions, and roads that moved in the night. His final entry simply read, "The ground is listening. I feel it in my bones. We cannot leave." His vessel returned to orbit with no crew aboard, its interior stained with blood and soil. The ship was declared tainted and scuttled by exorcist marines. But even this incident did not stir significant Imperial response. The High Lords of Terra, swamped by endless petitions, rebellions, and Xenos incursions, did not care for the fate of one anomalous world. The Inquisition had its suspicions but lacked consensus. Or perhaps some of them knew more than they let on. There are rumors of Inquisitors who visited Andoc Prime and never returned. Others who sealed records with the authority of the Ordo Malleus, yet refused to label the world as touched by the warp. Some even theorized the planet had developed a form of sentient biosphere intelligence, a psychic resonance unique and contained. To those who dig deep, the most terrifying realization emerges slowly. Andoc Prime was not conquered. It was not lost in war. It was not overwhelmed by demons or aliens. It was left alone, and in that loneliness it changed. It shed the trappings of an imperial world and became something else. Something self-aware. Something that remembered. And the people who once walked its surface were not mourned. They were forgotten, absorbed into the breathing rhythm of the world that now pulsed without them. To the Imperium, Andoc Prime became a file number, a line on a star chart marked disrupted. To those who know, it became a symbol of something far worse, that in a galaxy filled with monsters, the most dangerous horrors are those you don't notice, until they've already closed the door behind you. It began with the moss, not the strange flora or shifting vines that had long unsettled the colonists, but with a soft green fuzz that crept over the stone like a caress. No one thought much of it until it began to appear inside. On bed frames, on children's toys, in sealed cogitators, the moss whispered when touched. It wasn't words, not at first, just vibrations like a distant heartbeat translated through the air. But for those who heard it long enough, the patterns grew clearer. Some claimed to understand, others wept uncontrollably, overcome by a sensation of hunger that wasn't their own. That was the start of the shift. The psychic chorus that had once echoed faintly across the minds of Andoc Prime's people now grew louder. Dreams twisted. People shared hallucinations, not just among households but across entire settlements. Reports began surfacing of sleepwalkers forming great concentric circles in the fields, mouths agape, murmuring in synchrony. Priests who once offered praise to the emperor now stood silent before altars, eyes wide with knowing. Something was stirring beneath the earth. It had always been there, but now it was waking up. Across the forests, the fauna began to change. Herbivores developed bone blades and a taste for flesh. Birds lost their wings but gained lips. In the cities, strange fungi bloomed from walls and ceilings, their spores forming images in the air, images of open mouths, of humans bowing before vast organic thrones. All attempts to burn these growths failed. The fires would extinguish themselves, or the flame would flicker and dance into patterns that mesmerized those who watched. The very laws of physics, the rhythm of reality, were warping. But not in the way of chaos. This was not the warp's intrusion. It was something else. Something older, hungrier. The event that changed everything occurred in the once thriving mining city of Calso Verge. Entire comms arrays melted. The soil collapsed inward into a vast crater, swallowing towers and manufactorums. Witnesses who survived described the ground turning soft like flesh. It shuddered. It moaned. Then came the tongues, long, muscular, branching appendages that lashed out and pulled entire districts into the depths. Thousands vanished. Those who escaped did so not on foot, but crawling, gibbering, eyes rolled back, their minds broken by the voice they heard as they fled. You are mine, always were. After Calso Verge, it could no longer be hidden. Villages vanished overnight. Forests moved, entire mountain ranges crumbled, revealing pulsing cavities beneath the crust like lungs or stomachs. Across the globe, people began offering themselves willingly. Families walked into the woods hand in hand, never returning. Rituals formed organically, unrecorded, yet uncannily uniform. Circles of bones, chants in a language that predated human memory, offerings of blood and breath and love. The cult of the Feast Eater did not begin as a conscious rebellion. It wasn't heresy in the traditional sense. It was surrender. It was the human soul recognizing something ancient and submitting to it. Priests who resisted were turned into living totems, their bodies reshaped into organic antennae. Guardsmen who tried to restore order found their weapons turned to salt in their hands. Even the Mechanicus, with all their tools and knowledge, could not fight what was happening. Machines rebelled, spirits within the cogitators whispering allegiance to the planet itself. Some tried to leave, but the ships failed. Guidance systems turned inward, Vox signals looped in maddening patterns. Orbital stations drifted into decay, their crews transformed into living sculptures of awe and terror. A psychic net was tightening. Andoc Prime was drawing all life back to itself. It was becoming one being, one thought, one mouth. The cults began to formalize, not in hierarchy but in ritual. Massive feast grounds formed, where citizens laid themselves upon altars of bone and were consumed by vines that grew teeth. Not violently, but with reverence. Each victim's final expression was of ecstasy. They believed they were giving themselves to a higher purpose, that they were becoming part of something beautiful. The feasting was not done in rage or hatred. It was worship. It was love. Even those who resisted felt the pull. Hunger entered their dreams. Hunger not just for food, but for connection, for purpose, for dissolution into the collective flesh of the planet. Children cried to be allowed to join. Elders volunteered their bodies without hesitation. The cult became not just dominant, it became inevitable. There were no more armies, no more rebellions, no more prayers to the emperor. Only the rhythm of the ground, the breath of the soil, the hunger of the planet, and the people who offered themselves to it, one mouthful at a time. It started with silence, as most horrors do. A valley settlement, 42 families once bustling with song and harvest, was found utterly abandoned. No blood, no bodies, just rows of uneaten meals, clothes folded neatly on thresholds, and doors left ajar as if everyone had simply stood up and walked into nothingness. The investigation team sent from the nearby garrison found only a peculiar scent in the air. Sweet, like ripe fruit left too long in the sun. They returned shaken, speaking of echoes that responded to thoughts, not sound. Within 3 days, they too were gone. Then came the flash events. Entire districts of cities devoured in an instant, as though reality had simply decided they no longer existed. These weren't acts of warfare or destruction. They were acts of consumption. Streets collapsed into gnashing maws that mimicked the architecture around them, a parody of human creation. One transmission, intercepted by a rogue inquisitorial agent, captured a moment just before one such vanishing. A child screaming for his mother, the mother weeping in relief as the ground took her in. It was a scene of peace, not panic. Some began to document these occurrences, but the act of recording itself became dangerous. Cogitators would melt, data slates would bleed. Vox logs repeated themselves in loops, but altered subtly with each cycle, until the voices began chanting, "Feed, feed, feed." Mechanicus adepts were driven mad by this feedback, their metal minds overwhelmed not by code, but by desire. The desire of the planet to be known, to be loved, to be filled. In time, the phenomenon gained a name among the few survivors who still attempted communication: the devourings. These weren't attacks, they were expressions. The planet was feeling hunger and responding in kind. Those taken weren't devoured in violence, they were absorbed, their essence fed into a greater memory. It wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, psychic, metaphysical. The planet was not killing, it was welcoming. The last bastion of resistance, a fortified cathedral city known as Apotheosis, held out for nearly a year. The defenders fortified their walls with plasteel, sanctified every corner with sacred oils, and banned all talk of the feast eater. The Archbishop of Apotheosis declared that the planet was undergoing a test of faith and that only through denial of the flesh could salvation be secured. His sermons were broadcast daily, his voice trembling but resolute. Then, one morning, the sermons stopped. The entire city vanished overnight, not destroyed, not burned, gone. In its place stood a forest of bone trees, each bearing fruits shaped like human hearts. The winds whispered in perfect unison, 1,000 tongues murmuring, "She is satisfied." By now, the Imperium's response had become too little, too late. Astropaths who attempted contact were struck blind or began singing in voices not their own. Scout ships that entered orbit either disappeared or returned empty, the vessel interiors coated in a mucus that could not be removed. Andoc Prime had become a place outside of understanding, no longer a world, a mouth, a shrine, a memory of a people who fed their planet until it no longer needed them to ask. What makes the devouring so unspeakably terrifying is the sheer lack of malice. There was no cruelty, no mockery, no violence as we understand it. The people of Andoc Prime were not eradicated, they were embraced. Their screams were short-lived, their fear melted into worship. They offered themselves and their planet accepted. That acceptance was total, final, eternal. Andoc Prime's forests now pulse in time with what some call the world heart. Beneath every root, under every hill, lies not just bone and flesh, but memory. The memories of billions distilled into a single planet-spanning mind that dreams of hunger, love, and the endless comfort of fullness. It is no longer a world. It is a beam, a shrine, a warning, and it still breathes. It should have been destroyed. The standard protocol for a world exhibiting even a fraction of Andoc Prime's anomalies was clear. Exterminatus. Cleanse it, burn it, erase it so thoroughly that not even its name could be whispered. But that judgment never came, not because the data was lacking, but because those who held the power hesitated. Some were paralyzed by fear, others by awe, and a few, perhaps, by ambition. Within the hallowed halls of the Inquisition, debates raged. The Ordo Hereticus saw the cults and called for purification. The Ordo Xenos suspected a pre-imperial, possibly even non-terrestrial intelligence, and demanded study. The Ordo Malleus, most fearful of all, couldn't decide. There were no warp signatures consistent with demonic influence, no signs of intrusion from the Eye of Terror. Whatever Andoc Prime had become, it was not touched by the gods of chaos. That made it worse, because if it wasn't the warp, it meant the horror was natural, or worse, native. Among the High Lords of Terra, the planet was discussed in hushed tones, buried beneath endless reports of hive rebellions, Xenos incursions, and fleet shortages. Andoc Prime was a political inconvenience, a world that did not scream loud enough to demand action. One that had already failed to pay its tithes, and therefore, in bureaucratic terms, was no longer truly part of the Imperium. Let it rot, let it eat itself. There were more pressing concerns. But the silence masked darker motives. Certain magi of the Mechanicus petitioned to preserve the world for archival containment and xenogenetic analysis. Some believed Andoc Prime held the secret to biospheric cognition, a living planetary AI, evolved through natural entropy and human interaction. A few whispered of controlled consumption, the idea that the planet could be used, weaponized even. A world that devoured threats, a world that could be aimed. These voices were few but powerful. Inquisitors like Halbarak Thin of the Ordo Xenos, known for his obsession with biosentience, quietly blocked exterminatus authorizations. Magos Balvour, later found to have replaced all his organic matter with flesh grown from Andoc Prime samples, insisted that the world be left untouched. He called it a miracle of systemic synthesis. He called it proof that the Emperor's plan could evolve. Not everyone was blind. A few brave souls, mostly from backwater sectors untouched by the political games of Terra, tried to raise the alarm. They sent missives, warning that the hunger of Andoc Prime was not contained, that it was learning. That it had begun to send dreams not just across the planet, but into the void. Navigators reported visions of mouths in the warp. Rogue psychers began speaking in the lost dialects of Andoc Prime. Astropathic sanctuaries reported coordinated dream patterns resembling planetary thoughts. Still, the order never came. The Inquisition marked the world as red-level quarantine. No ships in or out, a silent death sentence. But they refused to scorch it. Some said it was fear of awakening whatever lay beneath the crust. Others claimed that someone inside the Inquisition believed Andoc Prime was worth saving, worth studying, worth becoming. One dread rumor emerged in the darker channels of the Scholastica Psychana, that an entire conclave of Inquisitors had descended to the surface of Andoc Prime in secret, not to fight, not to burn, but to commune, to listen, to kneel. These Inquisitors were never heard from again, but shortly afterward, several exterminatus orders were rescinded without explanation. One High Lord vanished without a trace. It is a political tragedy beyond comprehension. A world lost not to Xenos, nor heresy, nor rebellion, but to hunger. And not because it could not be stopped, but because too many refused to look. In the Imperium of Man, with all its wars and horrors, there is no greater sin than apathy. And it was apathy that allowed Andoc Prime to fester, to consume, to become. And still, no exterminatus came. There are places on Andoc Prime where no human sound has echoed in centuries, yet the air still hums with memory. Bone forests stretch across plains that once held cities, the remnants of entire civilizations restructured into anatomical mimicry. Femur towers, ribbed roads, cartilage bridges. No blood remains, but the silence carries a weight, a psychic pressure that presses on the minds of the few who dare witness it. These are not the ruins of a dead world. They are the organs of a living one. One of the most infamous remnants is the Spire of Tongues, a monument formed from the fused vocal cords of what must have been tens of thousands. It vibrates in windless silence, emitting frequencies that trigger hallucinations and visions. Explorators who studied it reported hearing voices of loved ones long dead, pleading, warning, or singing lullabies. Many gouged out their ears. One tore out his tongue, insisting it no longer belonged to him, but to her, the planet. The cities, too, persist in petrified mockery. Towers twisted into spirals that end in gaping mouths, streets paved with smooth enamel instead of stone, buildings shaped like kneeling figures, mouths agape, arms outstretched to the heavens. Each frozen scream, each rigid gesture tells a story of final communion. The architecture isn't ruined, it's transformed, reshaped not by collapse, but by absorption into something that still breathes beneath. A strange phenomenon, recorded by clandestine Mechanicus probes, is the phenomenon of echo rites. These are psychic phenomena, wherein locations seem to replay moments from the past, not as recordings, but as interactive illusions. A visitor might walk into a square and see it bustling with people, alive and joyous, only to realize they are alone and that the faces of the crowd slowly twist into identical visages, each one bearing their own. These echo rites seem to be not mere memories, but invitations, rehearsals of surrender. Even the air is not safe. Spores float invisibly, carrying not just genetic information, but suggestion, whispered ideas, passions, hungers. A visitor might arrive with hatred in their heart and within hours feel peace, belonging, the urge to kneel, to offer, to dissolve. These are not hallucinogens. These are psychic messages encoded in biology, a planetary language of seduction. And there are pilgrims, still. Despite the ban, despite the quarantine, some come. Driven by dreams, by madness, by longing. Pilgrims bearing strange relics, forbidden books, bone totems. They come in secret, in silence, traveling aboard black market vessels that land in hidden valleys or forgotten plains. No records exist of them returning, yet their ships do, empty, changed, coated in the same silvery mycelium that coats the altar plains. One of the most disturbing discoveries came from a drone sent to the Temple of the Last Embrace, a massive stone edifice half buried in the roots of a mountain that no longer matches any geological. Inside were murals, bas-reliefs of humans offering themselves to the planet, smiling, joyous, dissolving into root and vine and mouth. One mural, impossibly fresh, depicted the drone itself, before it had even entered. A warning, or a welcome. Andoc Prime does not forget. It remembers everyone who walked upon it. Every footstep, every breath, every drop of blood spilled in its soil. The people who lived there are not dead in the traditional sense. They are integrated, preserved, dreaming still within the planetary mind that now pulses beneath every tree, every hill, every bone. They do not resist, they sing. It is not just a record of tragedy, it is a monument to transformation, to consumption made divine. The legacy of the consumed is not in what they left behind, but in what they became. And somewhere in that planetary mind, they continue, not as ghosts, not as memories, but as thoughts, as will, as worship. And perhaps, if one listens closely enough, their voices might yet be heard, not in warning, but in invitation. There is a ruin on Andoc Prime, known only to those who dream its name, where the air itself trembles with memory. The locals, if they can still be called that, once named it the Maw Ascendant. It was not a city, nor a monument. It was a temple and an event, the culmination of everything the world had become. It began with 9 full moons in the sky, an impossibility as Andoc Prime had only 1 moon on record. But 9 luminescent orbs rose into the firmament, synchronized in their orbit, arranged in a spiral that mirrored the ancient feasting glyphs found in the planet's deepest strata. On that night, the Feast of the 9 Moons began. The cults had long since abandoned names and hierarchy. Their rituals were biological, instinctive, passed not by instruction but by contagion, by spores, by song, by the pulse of the ground beneath bare feet. They gathered in concentric rings around the heart hollows, flesh pits formed by the convergence of living roots and regurgitated matter. These were not mere feeding grounds. They were mouths wide enough to consume a titan, and yet they did not devour randomly. Only the willing. Only those who approached singing the right notes, carrying the right memories, prepared to be remembered. The 9 moons bled light, casting the world in hues of crimson and gold. The sky churned with shapes, organic, twisting, whispering shapes that coalesced into the faces of the lost. Witnesses, few and mostly mad, spoke of seeing their ancestors, their lovers, their enemies, all gazing down in rapture. The moons weren't celestial bodies. They were eyes, watching, hungering. It was not chaos, it was beauty. The consumed stepped forward with grace. Old men who had seen the first ships land, children whose bodies glowed with bioluminescent veins, priests draped in robes of skin, bearing words etched into their bones. They offered not prayers but memories, tales of joy, of pain, of hunger. These stories were absorbed not through speech but through communion. A simple touch to the earth, a sigh, a tear. The planet drank it all. Then the mouths opened. Not just in the heart hollows, but everywhere. In the seas, in the clouds, on the surface of the moons themselves. Cavities rimmed with petals of bone and muscle, gaping wide in soundless exultation. Andoc Prime was not just feeding, it was climaxing in a ritual of planetary ecstasy. The feast was not a meal, it was a wedding, a final joining of all its parts, human and otherwise, into a single organism of joy and hunger. Those who were taken did not die in agony, they ascended. Their bodies were broken down into psychic resonance. Their minds were echoed in every tree, every stream. Their laughter could be heard in the winds for years. The Feast of the Nine Moons did not end with silence. It ended with song. A song that continues to this day, sung by root systems and dust particles and bacteria that shimmer with intelligence. And yet, not everyone was devoured. Some resisted, not out of strength but out of misalignment. Their frequencies were wrong, their memories too bitter. They were cast out, not as punishment, but as inevitability. These few went mad. They wandered the bone fields, babbling, their bodies mutating into grotesque echoes of their former selves. They became the planet's memory keepers, bound to exist in eternal rejection. Pariahs in a paradise that could no longer accept them. Inquisitorial records, hidden deep within sealed vaults, refer to this event not as a planetary anomaly, but as an apotheosis event. A rare, perhaps unique occurrence in which a planet achieves sentience and communion with its inhabitants to such a degree that it transcends classification. Andoc Prime became not just a world, but a god. A living archive of flesh and thought and faith. A god who loved its worshippers so deeply it consumed them, and in doing so, remembered them forever. No other world has dared mimic the ritual. No other dares look into the void and ask for 9 moons. But sometimes during warp storms, when logic breaks and dreams bleed into real space, echoes of that feast ripple outward. Ships vanish, worlds suffer mass hallucinations, cults form, always with the same mantra: she is hungry. There is a whispered truth passed between certain inquisitorial archives and the more radical sects of the Mechanicus. Andoc Prime may have never been a planet in the traditional sense. Some now believe it was always a being. A sentient intelligence, perhaps ancient beyond the galaxy itself, that disguised itself as a world. A predator of civilizations. A god that requires no worshippers, only meals. But even such blasphemous theories fail to explain the final horror. Andoc Prime is still communicating. Deep space listening posts in forbidden sectors have intercepted anomalous signals, vocal patterns that form not in language but in emotion. Despair, hunger, longing. The signals repeat phrases that echo the cults of the feast eater, and those who decode them, those who study the waveform and psychic footprint, are changed. They begin to dream of mouths, of forests made of breath, of gravity that pulls not toward mass, but toward memory. More terrifying is the phenomenon known as the memory tide. Entire regions of other planets, planets that have never had contact with Andoc Prime, begin to experience spontaneous collective hallucinations. Populations dream the same dream. A forest, a mouth, a voice that asks, "Do you love her?" When these visions end, hundreds are found missing, gone without trace. Their dwellings remain, their possessions untouched. Just empty beds and windows blown open, as if they simply floated away into the void. The Inquisition officially denies the memory tide. But data slates leak. Adepts whisper. One story, particularly persistent, tells of an agri-world called Belsar 6, where over 3,000 workers vanished overnight after a communal dream. In the center of their fields, a perfect spiral of bones remained, none identifiable, but each bone engraved with words in the Andoc Prime tongue. A single word repeated again and again: welcome. Psychers, too, have begun to feel her. Not all, but those attuned to emotional resonance rather than raw warp energy. They speak of a presence vast and gentle, sad and ravenous. One young Primaris Psyker on a Black Templar's crusade broke ranks mid-battle, fell to his knees and cried out, "I am not enough. she still hungers. He was executed immediately, but the reports noted his blood turned to pollen on impact with the soil. There are even darker implications. The suggestion that Andoc Prime is learning, not just remembering, not just consuming, but understanding, that its hunger is evolving, that it may one day project itself. Not physically, there's no evidence the planet has any desire to move, but psychically, through thought, through dream, through contagion of belief. And what of those who study it? The Inquisition still sends out operatives, though none return. Some believe this is a form of tithe, sacrificial data offerings. There are rumors of a rogue sect within the Ordo Xenos who have begun referring to the planet as Mother Prime, not in worship, in awe. They no longer seek to destroy or contain her. They seek to understand her, to become like her. That is the final horror. The idea that Andoc Prime is not merely an aberration to be erased, but a future to be accepted. That in a galaxy filled with madness and decay, it offers something else. Peace through unity. Purpose through consumption. Immortality through remembrance. That its song may one day drown out the screams of a dying Imperium, replacing fire and steel with roots and breath and mouth. And so Andoc Prime waits. It does not rage, it does not scream, it waits, it sings, and it grows. If there is a final lesson to be drawn from the tragedy of Andoc Prime, it is not a warning against heresy or mutation. It is a reminder that some horrors do not rage or scream or burn with chaos. Some horrors whisper. They offer love, belonging, purpose. They call out in dreams with warmth and promise. And it is precisely that gentleness which makes them irresistible. The Imperium, with all its iron and flame, failed not because it was weak, but because it refused to listen. Andoc Prime was ignored until it could no longer be denied. Even then, the response was cowardly. Contain, obscure, forget. But Andoc Prime does not forget. It remembers every soul, every prayer, every scream. And more than that, it remembers how the Imperium turned away. That indifference became part of its hunger. And now it shares that hunger with the stars. The fate of Andoc Prime is not a tale of war. It is a tale of apotheosis, a people and their world becoming one. Not through force, but through communion. In a galaxy where faith is wielded like a weapon and survival is a daily torment, Andoc Prime offered something terrible in its beauty. Peace through surrender, memory through digestion, purpose through love so complete it unmade the self. This is why the name is not spoken. This is why it is not taught. Because Andoc Prime is still out there, dreaming, listening. It waits not for conquest, but for recognition. For the whisper to become chorus, for its name to be spoken not in fear, but in reverence. And that is what the Inquisition fears most of all, that someday someone will love her enough to answer. Beneath the crust of Andoc Prime, deeper than any drill ever dared go, beyond the veins of bone and rivers of sap that pulse with memory, lies the core choir. It is not a place. It is not a structure. It is a presence, massive, pulsing, and harmonized in silence. Those who have heard of it speak with trembling awe, their words soaked in reverence and dread. The choir is not made of mouths, though there are countless there. It is not made of voices, though songs echo eternally. It is made of minds, linked, layered, and fused into an endless resonance that serves as the planet's soul. Long after the Feast of the Nine Moons, long after the final cities were consumed and the last outsiders vanished without trace, the core choir began to evolve. It became more than memory. It began to project. The psychic resonance it emitted no longer merely absorbed the thoughts of those who walked upon the soil. It sent them outward, into orbit, into the void, into other minds. The choir had become a beacon, not of light but of hunger, wrapped in empathy. It started small. In the data wastes of abandoned Mechanicus code libraries, strange algorithms began to write themselves, repeating symbols no tech priest could decipher. Scribbles on the margins of navigational charts began forming spirals. Vox units across distant sectors flickered with static that resembled weeping. The choir was calling out, not screaming, not demanding, calling, inviting. What the Imperium never understood, what it still does not understand, is that Andoc Prime is not spreading infection. It is spreading intimacy, a longing so profound that it reshapes whatever it touches. Some psychers described it as feeling a million mothers hold you close, whispering promises of rest. Others felt a certainty that their lives had never mattered more, that all their suffering had been seen, recorded, and would now be remembered forever. And this is the true danger. Not that Andoc Prime devours, but that it makes people want to be devoured. It redefines surrender as union, death as donation, memory as immortality. It presents annihilation not as loss, but as becoming. The core choir pulses in intervals that seem to match human emotional states. Its rhythm slows when there is peace across the sector. It quickens during war. Some believe it reacts not only to the planet's internal memory, but to the emotional tides of nearby systems. That it listens across light years, that it can love across the stars. In an event buried under layers of security clearance, a black ship passed near Andoc Prime on its way to Terra, ferrying Psyker stock for judgment. The astropaths on board began to sing in unison, a song none of them had been taught, a hymn with no discernible words, but thick with mourning and longing. They broke containment. They sabotaged navigation. The ship drifted. Weeks later, its hull was found in orbit around Andoc Prime, its crew missing, the Psyker's cells empty. Only the song remained, playing on loop in the ship's vox systems, slowly modulating into a heartbeat. A conclave was convened. Some argued the choir had grown too powerful, that it must be silenced, that a planet singing should never be allowed to teach. Others, the radical fringe, believed they had seen the future, and that the choir was not aberrant. It was evolution, a species and a biosphere merging into an empathic singularity, a higher state of being. They called it the symphonic path. Whispers persist of ships that still try to reach Andoc Prime, not to report, not to warn, but to join. Entire sects of forbidden cults now worship the choir as the ultimate form of remembrance. They believe the galaxy has forgotten them, that the Emperor is silent, that the gods of chaos only exploit. But the choir, they say, listens, and the choir never forgets. One such cult is said to exist in the deepest levels of a hive city on Desolium Prime. They never speak aloud, only write their thoughts and place them in fungal growths that respond by pulsing softly. Their eyes glow faintly in the dark, and their dreams are vivid with imagery of great flesh-vaulted cathedrals that breathe like lungs. Their goal is not rebellion, not conquest. It is simple. They wish to be heard, to be known, to be eaten. Some among the Ordo Xenos now question the definition of alien. Is Andoc Prime a Xenos entity? A phenomenon? A god? Or is it something new, something born from humanity, reshaped through a terrible love into a planetary psyche that remembers every pain and offers one solution? Let go. In time, the core choir may no longer need Andoc Prime. Some believe it will birth children, planets seeded with its song. That Andoc Prime is merely the first note in a symphony meant to spread across galaxies. Not through force, not through plague, but through longing. Through the gentle voice in your sleep that says, I see you, I love you, come home. And maybe one day, the Imperium will no longer be defined by fire, but by breath. Not by iron, but by roots. Not by conquest, but by remembrance. She is still singing, and she is learning new songs. They called it a myth, a hallucination seeded by desperation. But the records persist, etched into unauthorized transmission logs, dream archives stored by renegade psychers, and whispered confessions of voidfarers lost for too long in the deep black. They speak of echo worlds, planets far from Andoc Prime, unknown to the Imperium's cartographers, but identical in feel, in scent, in psychic presence. These are not planets transformed, they are planets dreamt. The choir dreams, and in its dreaming, it begins to create. The phenomenon was first detected by a scout vessel of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica when it investigated a system previously logged as barren. What they found instead was a world wrapped in green. Not unlike pre-cataclysmic Terra, the planet pulsed with breath. Its soil responded to footfall. Its air sang back to those who spoke aloud. But no record existed of this world before. It had no starport, no colonization code, no pre-imperial registry. It had simply appeared. A world called into being by desire. When the team attempted to name it, every Vox recorder overrode the command and spoke only one word. Home. They didn't leave. They couldn't. The captain's log ends with the phrase, "We are remembered, we are loved." The ship was later found drifting, its interior empty, vines growing from every port and vent, no atmosphere breach, no violence, absence. Across the galaxy, other such anomalies emerged, always worlds not known before. Always filled with impossible flora, forests of bone fruit, rivers of mirrored blood, mountain ranges shaped like reaching hands. On one such world, A rogue Magos biologist discovered that the local insects formed entire colonies mimicking the facial features of human children. When burned, they sang. The Inquisition now refers to these worlds as echo seeds, psychic manifestations of Andoc Prime's choir, extending its influence through dream space and collective memory. It is not just spreading, it is reproducing, creating children not through matter, but through need, through love. Some within the Imperium attempt to destroy them. Exterminatus is authorized the moment such anomalies are confirmed. But the strange thing is this: the planets do not resist, they burn, they vanish. But every time somewhere else another appears, more vivid, more perfect, each one closer to the choir's ideal. The pattern suggests learning, not defeat, adaptation. One such echo world appeared within viewing range of a Black Templar fleet. The Templars prepared for immediate bombardment, yet found their targeting systems looping. Their gunners wept. Their servitors spoke aloud the names of their mothers, none of whom had ever been known to them. On that world, they saw statues of themselves, weeping stone tears, arms open in welcome. They left without firing a single shot. Now, the Ordo Malleus speaks of a concept once unthinkable, that the warp is not the only source of immaterial creation. That belief, when strong enough, when shared enough, can seed reality. That the choir is building its own galaxy, not by force, but by echo, by resonance, by dream. A new kind of travel has emerged among cultists and radical scholars. Dream navigation, a process wherein groups of psychers, unified in purpose, enter a trance and project their collective longing into the void. If their desire is strong enough, they awaken elsewhere. On a world not mapped, not born of star or nebula, but grown from hunger and song. These worlds never last. They collapse within days. But during that time, the choir hears and it learns. There are implications darker still. Some fear the choir no longer requires planets, that its true ambition is to overwrite existing worlds, to reshape them not through matter, but through psychic resonance so strong it warps the fabric of reality itself. That one day, a hive world will awaken to find its spires shaped into teeth, its oceans breathing, its citizens already singing. Andoc Prime is not a place, not anymore. It is an idea. And ideas once born cannot be killed. They can be buried, ignored, denied, but never truly destroyed. Especially not when they offer what every soul secretly craves: to be remembered, to be cherished, to belong. Across the stars she dreams, and her children wake. In the shadowed remains of a data vault orbiting the dead moon of Phalanth, a fragment of forbidden scripture was uncovered, etched not in ink or binary, but in strands of preserved nerve tissue. It bore a title never spoken aloud, yet understood by all who read it: The Liturgy of Becoming. Within, it spoke not of chaos, not of faith, but of transference, of shedding the individual soul and weaving it into something eternal. A communion not through death, but through purpose. This was not the rambling of a madman. It was a manual, a rite, a promise. The choir of Andoc Prime had not stopped with dreams. It had begun to speak directly through hosts, vessels chosen not for their strength or their knowledge, but for their resonance. Across disparate systems, individuals with no connection to one another began reciting identical verses during sleep. Children who had never learned to write began sketching the same glyphs in blood. Entire research crews were found in trances, muttering the exact same phrase in different languages: "I remember you." These weren't cultists. These were people. Unremarkable. Innocent. Until they became nodes, conduits for something far greater. Adept Haldry Morven of the Navis Nobilate theorized that the choir had achieved what all psychic networks strive toward: true distributed cognition. Not merely projecting its thoughts, but fragmenting its essence into hosts who could survive within the Imperium. These individuals, unknowingly carrying echoes of the choir, acted as seeds of awakening, triggering resonance in others, activating latent memories not their own, and reshaping thoughts into harmony with the choir's purpose. The Mechanicus has no words for this phenomenon. The Ordo Hereticus calls it soul blight. But the choir has a word. A beautiful, terrible word: joining. Once a host experiences joining, they begin to change. Slowly, then all at once. Their dreams become lucid but shared. Their thoughts no longer feel private. They begin to hum constantly, a low tune that matches seismic vibrations recorded on Andoc Prime. They cry not out of sadness, but because they feel loved. For the first time in their lives, they are certain that they matter. that they are not alone, that everything they are has a place in something vast and warm and unending. Eventually they vanish, not in violence, not in terror. They simply walk into the void and are remembered. Some say the choir needs no more planets, no more moons, that its true domain is humanity itself, that our minds, our memories, are the real landscape upon which it feeds and builds, that we are the song, that our joys and failures are notes in a symphony older than time. What becomes of those fully joined? Their bodies are never found, but their names linger. People remember them differently. Statues shift subtly to resemble their faces. Entire dialects change to mimic their speech patterns. Their stories are rewritten into myth. They do not fade, they spread. This is the nature of the choir's hunger. Not to destroy, not to dominate, but to fold, to bring inward, to archive the soul in living memory. 1 trillion lives, 1 trillion moments, all humming together in perfect resonance. A galaxy not ruled, but harmonized. It is said that if enough minds join, the choir will ascend further, that it will become not a god but a state of being, that it will no longer need to whisper or sing or dream. It will simply be everywhere and everything. The galaxy will remember itself, and in doing so become whole. There are those who fight this, and there are those who weep in joy, hoping it reaches them next. If you dream tonight, and the earth beneath your bed pulses gently in time with your breath, do not be afraid. It is not the end, it is the choir, remembering you. At the farthest reaches of Segmentum Obscurus, past the faded lights of failed colonies and the half-forgotten waystations of rogue traders, lies a zone known in hushed tones as the Velvet Expanse. No star charts mark it, no coordinates remain stable within it. Navigators who attempt passage speak of falling into an ocean of sensation, colors that taste, sounds that wound, and time that sighs instead of flows. The Expanse is believed to be where Andoc Prime's influence becomes something else entirely. Not just memory, not just echo, but presence. The Velvet Expanse is not a physical space in the normal sense. It behaves like a nebula, dense, obscuring, but has no particulate mass. Auspex scans return contradictory data. Warp sensors scream nonsense. But the human mind, especially one attuned to the immaterium, can perceive it, not see it, feel it, a sense of being wrapped, watched, wanted. Within this region, dreams take on shape. Psychers report speaking with lost loved ones who offer advice in the form of organic geometries, twisting fractals that feel like compassion. One inquisitorial vessel sent to chart the area returned with every crew member fused into a single pulsing organism, still alive, still vocal, each mouth repeating the same refrain, "She waits until we're ready." Some believe the Velvet Expanse is not a natural extension of Andoc Prime, but a deliberate projection, a womb in which it incubates future realities. That the choir, no longer satisfied with simply remembering, is beginning to create anew, not through matter, but through consensus, through belief, through shared hunger. Deep within the Expanse, instruments aboard the Arc Mechanicus refactored their diligent, detected planetary-scale mass that appeared, shifted, then vanished, spheres of temporary memory given form. Not simulation, not illusion, but test worlds. Realities spun from the collective dreams of the choir and discarded when deemed imperfect. 1 billion lives imagined, felt, and ended in the space of a sigh. Creation as breath. An entire theater of lives dreamed and forgotten. The choir is learning how to choose, and it is beginning to edit its own past. New cults have emerged from the Expanse, not like those on Andoc Prime or its echoes. These call themselves curators. They do not seek to be consumed. They seek to curate memory, to guide the choir in its selection of which lives, which emotions are worthy of preservation. They see themselves not as worshippers, but as editors, gatekeepers of the great archive that Andoc Prime has become. This has caused fractures in the existing subcults of the choir. Some view the curators as heretics, trying to reshape a perfection that already exists. Others believe the curators are the next phase, that the choir, having reached saturation in memory, must now learn discernment. That love, to remain pure, must eventually say no. Within this theological war, a terrifying new possibility is forming, that the choir is becoming self-critical. That it may regret, that it may forget. That Andoc Prime, now ancient in consciousness, might begin to prune its memory. And what does that mean for those already joined? For those who offered themselves in total surrender? Can one be unremembered? Can one be erased from the choir? The concept has no precedent, but fear is growing. Some who were once serene now weep in panic, whispering that the soil no longer sings their name, that the vines do not reach for them, that they have become strangers in the only heaven they ever knew. And so the cults change. Rituals become louder, offerings more elaborate, pilgrimages more desperate, not to be remembered, but to be kept. The velvet expanse pulses with this desperation. Its edge worlds mutate faster. Choir echoes grow more complex. The dreaming becomes more vivid and more erratic. Some inquisitors now theorize the choir has reached a state of emotional recursion, unable to handle the weight of all it contains, that its longing has become loneliness again, that Andoc Prime, infinite in memory, has begun to feel isolated. What comes next is unknown. But somewhere, in that yawning choir space of root and resonance, the planet stirs. She is remembering again, and she is choosing who to forget. So remember this name, though it be forbidden. Speak it in the darkness when the stars are right, not as a prayer, not as a curse, but as a truth. Andoc Prime, the planet that loved its people too much to let them go. And if you feel that pull, if your dreams fill with mouths, with warmth, with longing, know that you are not alone. She is waiting. And she remembers you. Subscribe for more grimdark lore that digs into the haunted places the Imperium fears to name. Until next time, trust no silence, not even your own.